So Pantera. Pantera are one of those bands. There'll never be another band like them. So many people have been inspired by them and try to follow in their footsteps in some regards. But I don't think anything's ever really kind of lived up to what they managed to pull off. And I think it's fair enough to think of that band as sort of the Van Halen of extreme metal. And, you know, by today's standards, there's a lot more extreme music than that. But when those guys first dropped, there were a few bands, I would say, that were quite as aggressive as they were. And if they were certainly a bit more niche. Yeah, they almost certainly were around the same time, but they were definitely more underground. None were as well known, I would say, as Pantera at the time, except for maybe Slayer. And yeah, what they managed to achieve. Obviously, they had a long time in the 80s playing kind of power metal, but you know, from the Cowboys from Hell era onwards, what they managed to achieve with relatively few albums, the mark that they left on metal music is undeniable, and it stands till this day. And you know, there's some real interesting characters in the band, and I think that's kind of what made the band. Obviously, Dimebag Darrell being the legend that he was, that band had a real sense of humor between those two guys. Dimebag and his brother Vinny, and obviously real tragic ending there. In terms of, you know, Dimebag being shot, and you know, Vinnie Paul then passing away, you know, 13 years later. But even till this day, you know, when you see interviews with Phil Anselmo, that guy took a lot of pot shots. I think a lot of people didn't expect him to still be alive these days, let alone still making music. And you know, he's doing what he loves, and he's still performing well. But take nothing away from the man, he's an extremely gifted vocalist. He has a unique voice that's very hard to compare. And for somebody who's also got quite a deep timbre to his voice, he's got an incredible range, actually. You know, he's got an incredible singing range. Phenomenal vocalist. Standout, phenomenal top guitar player. I mean, Dimebag's riffs and his lead work, you know, that's real slam dunk material. Vinnie Paul, there's a lot of the drumming metal handbook that was kind of written, the blueprint for modern metal music that was written by Vinnie Paul. You know, he's one of those drummers that'll always stand as a reference to a lot of people, I think, on how to approach metal drums. And I always used to love the fact that he had a nice big kit with big drums, and he used to hit them really hard, and he used to use the fat end of the back end of the sticks to hit them and stuff like that. And then of course you got Rex Brown as well, a phenomenal bass player, in some ways a very underrated bass player, I think, if you ask me. He's kind of mellowed somewhat in the years that followed, but what a super nice guy. Like, I've chatted to him a couple of times on Facebook, here and there over the years. Super approachable, really down to earth, really nice guy. He's always got time to talk to people, and I think that's really admirable. And it's a real shame that they disbanded as soon as they did, because I think that there was always the potential there for great music with the chemistry that they had musically. And unfortunately, you know, just for interpersonal reasons, I guess, and the day-to-day being able to actually kind of live with each other and tour with each other and that sort of thing, it just wasn't to be. It's just really unfortunate. But anyway, let's get into the bones of the video, and I'll just talk about, you know, ranking the records post Cowboys from Hell, well, Cowboys from Hell and onwards, because really when you talk about pre-Cowboys from Hell, they're pretty much sort of like a power metal band, and it isn't really what I would deem to be, you know, what people associate with Pantera's sound. So we'll talk about it from Cowboys from Hell being the kind of kickoff point for this, just in order of whichever I think is worst to best. And really, let's be honest, we're splitting hairs here because all these albums are really pretty kick-ass. there's nothing that you would point to that would go like, oh, that's really lackluster. So Reinventing the Steel actually has some pretty cool tracks on it. The album opener, Hellbound, that's a really cool song. In my opinion, it's a really strong opener. Then you got, Goddamn Electric, which is kind of a bit Sabbathy, and there's for me there's like a bit of a pacing issue there, but it's still a cool song. You've got that You've Got to Belong to It, which is actually a pretty cool song as well, to be fair. And then, on track 5, Revolution Is My Name. That's a really cool song. That's got really kind of cool pulsing pace to it. That has a bit of momentum to it, but then the album starts to get a bit clunky, and then it kind of it's still cool tracks. Like, again, Splitting Hairs, there's some cool tracks on there, but it kind of gets a bit clunky. And for me, the lyrics they're not quite the same standard as the previous records. And then, of course, you've got the album Closer, and then it kind of picks up again. And I think that's that's a strong way to finish a record. It's got cool tracks on it, but none of them are what I would call sort of classic Pantera tracks. They're not the ones that you would kind of, if you were going to cite examples of like, oh, this is the epitome of Pantera, normally you'd be able to pick from almost any record. There would be more than one song you could pick from any of the other records, and you could point to that as being like the epitome of Pantera's material, or like a prime example, and you couldn't go wrong. With Reinventing the Steel, you don't really have those sort of standout tracks on it. It is a great sounding record. It's still got the attitude, it's still got the vibe. The guitar tone is a little bit smoother. It's not quite as crunchy, but it still sounds great overall. In fact, I really like the bass sound. It might be the best that was ever achieved on any of the records, but it's just not quite enough to elevate it into a higher spot for me. So yeah, we'll start off with calling that the worst, if you could call it such a thing. The next, I would probably share it out. It's got to be, like, I couldn't split these two records. I would say Cowboys from Hell and Far Beyond Driven. I kind of put them in a tie for third place, because I can't really split them, and here's why. Cowboys from Hell, there's some really, really classic strong tunes on there. So you got the title track, which is like required learning for any guitar player who's worth their salt in metal. And yeah, it's one of the songs that it just gets you pumped up straight away. It sets the tone for the record. But Cowboys from Hell, it also has a couple of other real standout moments on it, like Domination, for example. Absolutely mega tune. One of Dimebag's best solos, if you ask me, as well. It's just a phenomenal piece of lead work. Cemetery Gates, again, same sort of thing. Phenomenal vocal performance from Phil Anselmo. Maybe a little dated sounding. Cowboys from Hell has that little, that kind of real 80s edge to it. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but it just doesn't date as well maybe as the other records sonically, production-wise. But yeah, there's definitely some classic tunes on there, and it holds up really well after all these years, despite the 80s kind of early 90s styling. Far Beyond Driven's an interesting record. You've got the album opener, Strength Beyond Strength, and you've got Becoming, you've got I'm Broken, 5 Minutes Alone. They're all really good songs, classic tracks as well. But then you kind of get this lull in the middle. Then it picks up again for what I think is a really underrated Pantera tune, which is Use My Third Arm. That, for me, is one of my favourite tunes that they've ever put together. Then you've kind of got the hidden gem, Planet Caravan, which is a really great cover of Sabbath tune. And, and then the album kind of finishes off. But, yeah, I was never 100% happy with the production style of it. It's still good, and it's kind of like said, it's the first one, I guess. It sounds like a really modern Pantera in terms of the kind of size and weight of the mix, but it's a bit boxy sounding. The mid-range for the guitar is not quite right. Everything cuts through fine, and the drum sound is good and all that kind of thing, but it just has this boxy sound. The bass isn't quite as present as it is on Great Southern Trainkill. So in my opinion, yeah, it just doesn't quite hold up against Great Southern Train Kill as a direct comparison, but it still has a lot of classics on it. And it's got, as I said, kind of one or two real gems on it. I know there's a lot of people that really like songs like 5 Minutes Alone, and I like it too, but I prefer Pantera's slightly more up-tempo stuff. So yeah, anyway, I call that a tie for third place. Great Southern Train Kill, for me, that occupies the number 2 spot, and I know that this is a touchy one for a lot of people. They would probably put that in the number 1, but for me it's the number 2 spot. And it's a strange one. It's, again, really, really close between that and Vulgar Display. Great Southern Train Kill, for me, it's they actually achieved their best like production, if you ask me. Like, the guitars sound crunchy, they sound clear, they're meaty, but without getting boxy or harsh or anything like that. The bass kind of has its full weight, its full clarity. The drums have their full punch and a fantastic live kind of ambience to them. And it's really evident on certain tracks. So, for example, you got the obviously the album opener, which is a real classic song. The Great Southern Train Kill. I think it's just a phenomenal way to open a record. War Nerve. And a good example of like the production, I think that's really shows off like the fantastic drum sound that they managed to achieve, is 13 Steps. But then of course you've got kind of more sensitive moments. Well, when I say sensitive, I don't mean like overly like soppy or something. It's not full on kind of ballad, but it's in that sort of territory with Floods. I mean, what a song! What an absolute brilliant piece of orchestration. And in terms of vocal performances from Phil Anselmo, like, it's hard to get any better than that, I think, from a melodic perspective anyway. And he is an incredible singer, sometimes really underrated, and that was always evident all the way through from Cowboys from Hell, right the way through their career, that that guy was just a really great vocalist to have in a band. But Floods, it just demonstrates that really well. So again, and then of course you got Suicide Note Part 1 and 2, and again you get some kind of nice moments there, but you also get some really, really, really sharp, outright aggression, and it keeps the pace up really, really well through the entire record. There's no moments where it really kind of grinds or dips down or anything like that. So overall, it's a phenomenal record. The only reason I put Vulgar Display of Power in my kind of number 1 position is I think it just edges it in terms of like having the sheer amount of kind of classic tunes in one record. And although the sound arguably isn't as big and as crunchy, it doesn't really take away from the record. But yeah, so I mean, you've got obviously the album opener, you've got Walk, you've got This Love, you've got fucking Hostile, and the kind of list keeps going. There's quite a few tunes on that are just real classics and really memorable. And for a lot of people, this may not be true of everyone, but for a lot of people, that was the gateway record for a lot of people to get into Pantera. So Cowboys from Hell was around, but fewer people had heard of them. Then the single, for Walk, off of Vulgar Display, that dropped on like MTV and stuff, and that's the thing. I think that, and obviously you had This Love, those 2 tracks. If you ended up becoming a Pantera fan, there was a good chance it was because you saw those 2 videos, and then you picked up that record, and that was your gateway in. And that's the way it was for me. So maybe there's a sentimental attachment. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to touch on is Dimebag Darrell as a guitar player. When I first got into metal, Metallica was like my sort of gateway band, right? So the Black Album was the first record that got played to me. I'd heard them when I was younger, but just in passing. I heard some stuff off Ride the Lightning when I was really young. My older brother had a friend who'd played stuff off of it, but I never really took much notice, I suppose. Really, it was only in hindsight, once I got into the band later, that I was like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. But yeah, but the Black Album was like, I guess, my gateway into metal. And in a very, quickly I went out and bought their back catalogue and all that sort of stuff, and that's how I started listening to the faster stuff, and then that got me into the next recommendation I got from the same guy who gave me that record. Who got me into the Black record. The next recommendation he had was Vulgar Display of Power. And yeah, just touching upon the lead guitar work, well, the guitar work outright. Dimebag Darrell's a really special guitar player. If you consider something, let's use Kirk Hammett as a benchmark. I mean, Kirk's a good player. But from a guitar playing standpoint, his licks can be... He had a point where actually he had some slightly more exotic scales and stuff like that he would use. But for the most part, the licks are kind of, well, a little bit standard, you might say, by comparison to some other players. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a simplicity to what he does that really works and kind of serves the song, especially when you're talking about the old catalogue. And I'm not saying that everything is like a real doddle to play. That he's got some licks that are challenging, and some of them that are, for him, it's almost like if you nail the feel and the vibrato and the phrasing and stuff like that, that's the thing I think that makes his playing special. It's not necessarily the complexity of the licks themselves, and that's from a lead perspective. And obviously, I mean, you've got rhythm guys like Hetfield, which everyone kind of cites as the rhythm master. But Dimebag Darrell's like one of the... Oh, I was going to say an unsung hero, but that's not true, because lots of people celebrate Dimebag Darrell as a guitar player. But one of the things that made him special, first thing, is really it's the rhythm playing, because that's in the majority of the song, right? So, but he had this way, he made himself sound massive, really. He made himself sound a lot like it was two guitar players playing within the context of a three-piece instrumental setup within Pantera. And a lot of that came down to the feel of... it's not just his tone. Obviously a big champion for solid-state amps in a genre where most people really depend on tube amps. So that was one side of it. But to be honest, he probably could have done it with any amp that he chose to use. I think there's reasons why he went for solid state. It was just a bit snarlier. Maybe reacted a little bit more sharply for a lot of the sort of like dive bombing and pinch harmonic stuff that he did. But in terms of the rhythm, like, it's his application of vibrato on chords and things like that. That's a leaf out of Black Sabbath's book. And you hear guys like James Hetfield talk a lot about this, about how to get one single guitar track sounding really big, just through modulating your chords a little bit, just with a bit of vibrato and that sort of thing. So that was one thing. The other thing, it was obviously he's an extremely tight player. Really melodically sensitive as well. When you look at songs like This Love or Flood, Flood's the arpeggiated sections in that, the tone that he brought to it, his use of chorusing, just to give that kind of bell-like chime to the tone. So he had a real good touch for that, and there was a subtlety to his technique. As far as the lead playing is concerned, one of the reasons I took to Pantera is, later on I was introduced to Megadeth and I got into Marty Friedman, but if I think of two players that kind of played outside the box, especially compared with all the other metal and kind of virtuosic playing that was going on at the time in the late 80s and through the early 90s in particular, loads of people were shredding, right? And loads of people could really, really, really play, like serious players. But we went through a phase, not unlike a phase that we've just been through actually, where a lot of players started to sound very, very samey. Particularly with guys like Vi and Satriani being such a big influence on people, a lot of people started sounding quite samey to them, or I guess trying to emulate Paul Gilbert, those guys, and particularly Van Halen. Now Van Halen was a massive influence on Dimebag, but rather than copy directly, like cut and paste his licks and style and that sort of thing. It looks like Dimebag kind of assimilated his attitude. And I think that resulted in some really great original playing, because yeah, he did. He thought outside the box with his playing. He would go to notes that other people wouldn't necessarily think to go to. And it was a very extreme style, I feel, of lead playing. As I mentioned earlier, with his use of pinch harmonics and particularly with his dive bombs, and then in combination with the whammy pedal, he created a sound that, again, a lot of people then after that were really trying to emulate, and I don't think anyone's ever really reached the proficiency or heights that he reached with that kind of playing. But he also had this, there's no denying that there's a strong Texas vibe, to Pantera, particularly Vinnie Paul and Dimebag's, I guess, upbringing. So they brought that to the table as well, and that comes through a little bit in Dimebag's playing in terms of his choice on notes to bend to. So the way he would use a pentatonic scale, and then the way he would kind of just play out of that a little bit. There's definitely some leanings to like southern music there, but in a cool way. So, whereas, like, say for instance with Metallica, when they went through the load reload era and they went more bluesy, that was more kind of like just kind of stock blues and a little bit of like country leaning here and there. But Dimebag took that and put it into a more extreme interpretation with a lot more aggression. And so instead of it being something that kind of mellowed down the sound, it actually took the level of intensity up. So I think he's really unique and really special for that, and his contribution to metal as a whole is just completely undeniable. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Would you rank them in the same order? And I didn't include the pre-Cowboys from Hell stuff because frankly it's like almost like talking about a different band. It is basically just a full-on power metal band at that point. So I consider Cowboys to be the genesis of what became known as Pantera, what people identify as Pantera's music. But yeah, let me know in the comments how you would have ranked them. What would be your number ones? Where were the differences? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? That sort of thing. Yeah, look forward to hearing about that. Otherwise, I'll give you a quick album update, just how it's going. I've got all the vocals now recorded, and I'm starting to work on final mixes. I actually don't have the guitar solos all done yet. I still have to write and record those, but I'm kind of going out of sequence now, and it's because I can't really record at home at the moment with baby in the house. So what I'm having to do is wait until I've got time available to record it off-site. So it's going to take some time to write and record those. So I'm doing pretty much final mixing now while I can, because to drop in just leads and solo work and stuff like that isn't going to be a big job to kind of drop those into the mix, because I have all the rhythm work and all of that done, all the harmonies, and crucially the vocals. So I can actually progress the mix pretty far, and then just come in and put the leads in at the end and just tweak things. So I said before in a video that I hope to have that done by June. I think that's still feasible, so I'm sticking to that for now. And then there might be just a bit of time to do kind of artwork and marketing and copyright and all that kind of stuff, and just make sure it's actually ready to go, and then I'll put it up. But if anything changes, I'll let you know. Right, until later, take it easy. Bye bye.